How could they have foreseen that the protections for slavery they wrote into the Constitution would become one of the most formidable obstacles to abolition in the United States? It's also tempting to think that the only thing abolition required was the will to make it happen. If the abolitionists could persuade enough people to hate slavery, the end of slavery would surely follow. By the late 18th century, however, most people in the northern states already disliked slavery, and while the intensity of their dislike waxed and waned over the decades, the biggest problem abolitionists faced was not a pro-slavery public but a constitution that protected slavery in the states where it already existed. What could the federal government do to destroy slavery if everyone believed it was strictly a state matter, that the Constitution put it beyond the reach of federal intervention? How could there be any national anti-slavery politics if there was nothing the federal government could do about it? Answering such questions was the single greatest challenge for opponents of slavery. That challenge became more rather than less daunting as the explosive growth of the Cotton Kingdom after 1790 cemented the political power of the slaveholders and transformed the South into one of the largest slave societies in the history of the world. Nevertheless, by 1860, anti-slavery lawyers and politicians had formulated two distinct scenarios for a national assault on slavery. One was federal pressure on states to abolish slavery themselves. Though nearly everyone agreed that the federal government could not directly abolish slavery in the states, Republicans endorsed a number of policies they believed would eventually force the southern states to destroy slavery on their own. The federal government would surround the South with free states, free territories, and free waters, building what they called a cordon of freedom around slavery, hemming it in until the system's own internal weaknesses forced the slave states one by one to abandon slavery. To these external pressures, the Republicans would add a number of federal incentives, a gradual timetable, monetary compensation, and subsidies for the voluntary colonization of the freed slaves, all of them designed to speed up the process of state abolition, beginning with the slave states bordering on the north, Delaware, Maryland, Kentucky, and Missouri. This was a peacetime policy designed to put slavery on what Abraham Lincoln called a course of ultimate extinction. But if there was a war, or a rebellion, the Constitution empowered the federal government to implement a second policy, military emancipation, until peace and order were restored. Any educated person would have been familiar with the historical precedents, stretching back to antiquity, for emancipating enemy slaves in wartime. But the precedents had not produced a theory of military emancipation. The founding treatises on the laws of war had almost nothing to say about slavery. In 1863, however, when called on to defend the legality of the Emancipation Proclamation, anti-slavery lawyers deployed what amounted to an abolitionist theory of military emancipation. These two policies, state abolition and military emancipation, were widely proclaimed by Republicans throughout the secession crisis. It was this unabashed Republican threat to slavery that provoked the South to secede from the Union in the immediate aftermath of Abraham Lincoln's election in November of 1860. Historians commonly dismiss secession as an outbreak of hysteria, irrationality, and paranoia. But events soon demonstrated that the Republican threat to slavery was far from imaginary. Before the first year of the war was out, both anti-slavery policies had been initiated. Based on the authority granted to it by the first Confiscation Act, the Lincoln administration began freeing slaves as a military necessity on August 8, 1861. Lincoln drafted his first proposals for state abolition a few months later. It's important to bear in mind that military emancipation and state abolition were two different policies pursued by Republicans along parallel lines throughout the war. Military emancipation was always immediate. Slaveholders were never compensated. It applied initially to the disloyal states, and it was implemented first beginning in the summer of 1861. Gradual abolition applied to loyal slave states, which were beyond the reach of full-scale military emancipation. Lincoln first